Great. Well, welcome everybody to our Take Action event. I think this is our fourth one for the day, and or the third one, I'm sorry. And we're super excited to have Todd Albert here joining us as a speaker. Todd is super involved in our community and has been a great leader in technology and development for students in tech. So I want to start off by announcing our partners for this event. It's ISACA South Florida chapter, SIM South Florida, Aire Ventures, and Tech Hub South Florida. And that's actually who I'm representing today. If you have any questions about Tech Hub South Florida or any of the other organizations, please reach out to us or to Elizabeth Decker and Dr. Tina Honey, who are on this call as well. And we do have an interpreter for today. We really highlight being inclusive and educating our community on the importance of basically including everybody. So we have Beth Wagmeister joining us today, and we also have Tammy, who works closely with Beth. So thank you both for being here. Oops. And a special thank you to our sponsors, Mission Staff, ISACA South Florida chapter, Biz Edge, and SIM South Florida. Yeah, so these are the speakers for today. So we're actually on our fourth speaker, Todd Albert. If you want to give us a little bit of a wave, we're super excited to learn how to write resumes correctly or just learn some tips. So if you guys have not done the Ready Challenge yet, please head to readychallenge.org. It's a quick 15-minute survey that will allow us to be inclusive and figure out where the gaps are in our ecosystem as South Florida and where we can support our diversity efforts. All right, so now I'm going to hand over the mic to the one and only Todd Albert. So feel free to share your screen and get going.
Said, all right, thank you so much, Monica, but nobody heard me because I was on mute. So yeah, I'm Todd Albert. I'm the founder and one of the lead instructors here at Boca Code. Are you guys hearing a lot of background noise? There's like, I could shut this door if you are. Okay, good. Yeah, so we're going to talk about building our resumes for tech today. But before we do, I just wanted to give a belated birthday wishes to one of my favorite people, Beth Wagmeister. It's her birthday yesterday. She's amazing. So I love you, Beth. She's incredible and a big part of our community. Okay, so the goal, first, let's get to resumes. Let's get to talking about resumes. So one of the most important things I can tell you about a resume is the goal of your resume. And for most people, they think that the goal of their resume is to get a job, and that is not the case. The goal of your resume is to get an interview. So, whoops. And that's an important distinction that I want to make, because if your goal is to get a job, you try and put everything in your resume that you can to convince people to give you a job, and you try and put everything in your cover letter to convince people to give you a job. And that's not the job of your resume. The job of your resume is to get people intrigued and interested enough in you to get an interview. So let's just lay that foundation and we'll move from there. The second is, and by the way, if you guys are, if it's going to be difficult for me to monitor the chat. So if anybody has any questions and want me to stop, please feel free to come off of mute and interrupt me. Or if somebody sees something in chat that they think I'll try and monitor, but feel free to interrupt. So let's start out with some important resume tips, and I'm going to give you 20 tips, and the first 10 are like, these are just 100%. You should do this, and there's no argument and there's no opinion. This is just 100%. You have to do this. So here are these first 10. So number one is double check and make sure you have the correct contact information on your resume. I actually had to change the phone number for Boca Code because every day we were getting phone calls from recruiters who were looking for Manish and wanted to offer Manish a job. And I don't know who Manish is, but apparently on his resume, he has the phone number for Boca Code. Also, as a hiring manager in the past, I have reached out to people that I really wanted to hire, or at least wanted to interview, more accurately, people that I really wanted to bring in for an interview, and they did not have the correct contact information. So when I sent them an email, or I sent that, or tried to call them, I couldn't get through to them. The email bounced or came back, sorry, the wrong person. So make sure you have your correct contact information on there. And speaking of email addresses, make sure to use your personal email address, not one from your former job or anything like that. Use a personal email address like a Gmail, but make sure that your email address is professional sounding, right? So like my Gmail is toddalbert@gmail.com. I know not everybody can get their name at Gmail, but don't use something like, if you're a gamer and you have like your gamer tag as your email, it doesn't sound professional. If you have something, an email address you created when you were 14, it might not be the same, the professional email address that you want to use for applying for jobs and putting on your resume. So keep that in mind. On your resume, make sure to put the most relevant information first. And I'll go through and give some, pointers on which sections you should have and which sections should go first. But always put the more relevant information for you and for the job you're applying for first, right? So I have a long employment history. I was in academia for many years, and then I moved into tech. And if I'm applying for a job where I'm looking to go back into academia, I would be putting my academic credentials and highlighting those and really focusing in on those. Whereas for a tech position, I would be highlighting the things I've done in the tech world. So make sure most relevant, whatever your most relevant information is, we want to highlight that and bring that up towards the top. But also, you want the most recent experience first. I see people sometimes they list things chronologically or not chronologically. It should always be reverse chronological. So your most recent experience down to older and getting older and older and older, like geologic layers or ice cores. It gets older as you go down. This is super important, spelling and grammar. A lot of times people will throw together their resume very quickly and they won't realize, but they'll have all kinds of typos and it'll be messy and no one will hire you. I've spoken to hundreds of hiring managers and everyone says this is a pet peeve. If you're not careful putting together your resume, then how do I know you're going to be careful and detail oriented in the job? So make sure you pay attention to those details, spelling, grammar. If you're not good at spelling and not good at grammar, have someone review it for you. Ask to get a second person to look at it. But always, I work a lot at night. I'll put things like my resume together at night, and then I'll wake up in the morning and I'll reread it before I send it. So that's another good tip. Read things out loud. Ask somebody to read it for you. And tip number 6 is keep it concise. This is actually one of my favorite words in the English language, even though people who know me know I'm very wordy and very verbose, and I like to repeat myself and give analogies and all kinds of things. And I tend to over-explain things like I'm doing on this slide, somewhat intentionally, whereas the word concise is short and to the point and complete. And I love it that this one little word means so much, but this is what you should do when you're creating your resume, is keep it concise, right? Like Monica says, she loves it, right? And, those who know me know, don't get in a conversation with me unless you have time to spend. All right, step 7, make it easy to read. Format it so that it's very easy to follow, it's easy to read. no little type fonts and all different kinds of fonts and colors, and just keep it simple. Just use like a very simple template. Don't over design it, but make sure it's clear and well organized. As you know, the hiring manager that is looking at your resume, a lot of times we're looking at hundreds of resumes in a week, and you don't want us to struggle when we're reading yours. If I'm looking at your resume and I'm like, which side is up and where's the education, and you know, and it doesn't flow, I'm just gonna toss it aside and move on to the next one. Even if you're a genius, you're not a genius if your resume is a mess. Number 8, keep things aligned on the left. You know, keep it simple and aligned left. Like I said, make it very easy to follow. Use bold and italics and underline if necessary strategically, right? Keep things consistent though. So like the name of the company you work for is bold, your position is in italics, and then off to the left are the dates you work there, right? Very simple. You know, be consistent too. And then finally, 100% of the time, and every hiring manager I ever talked to says the same thing, your resume should be in PDF format. Every word processor now that you use, whether it's Google Docs, Microsoft Word, Pages for Apple, those are the only 3 really you should be using, because this isn't 1986. They all can save your resume to a PDF for you and create that PDF. Open and look at the PDF. I've seen a lot of people who like are in Google Docs and then they saved a PDF and there's like a weird line across their resume, and then they save it again and the line is gone, right? So be careful of weird formatting in your document. Just try and keep it simple. Okay, so those are my 10 tips that are like absolute must have, no excuse. Now I have 10 more, and these 10 really should be just as important as the others, but there are cases where these are not possible. And so I put them in a separate section so I don't get people saying, well, what if, and what if, and what if you can't do it, you can't do it. But if it's at all possible, you should also do these 10 things. Those first 10, non-negotiable, 100% of the time, no one disagrees, always do those first 10. The second 10 also are things that everyone agrees you should absolutely do, but there are cases where you just can't, you don't have the opportunity, and we'll get into some of that and why those could be. So these are also, you know, some of these are maybe even more important than the first 10, but we don't always have the opportunity to do these. So number 1, reread the job description twice. So I made this intentionally ambiguous. So if you reread it, that means you've read it once and now you reread it a second time. So what does it mean to reread it twice? It could mean that you should read it a third time. It could mean that if you should read it a third time and then reread it a fourth time. So either way, read it 3 or 4 times is what this means. And it's intentionally meant to kind of be a funny play on words like that, because you might have to read this twice, right? You read the job description and then you go and you start working on your resume and drafting a cover letter and getting ready to apply for the job, and you send it, and then you look back and you're like, oh crap, I didn't realize they wanted this and this. Oh God. And now you sent it off and it's too late. So go back, reread that job description, make sure you got all the details and everything. And, you know, now that said, in tech, there's a big tendency for job descriptions to not match the job. And let me explain. I've been in situations where I was the person who was looking to hire a developer, and the CTO wanted me to put certain things in the job description that I didn't want to be in there, but I was pushed to do that. Then we had to send that job description over to the HR department, and the HR department wanted to add things to the job description that I necessarily want to put there. As my career went further and further, I could say, you know, I could override these people and say, no, this is the job description. That's what I want. That's what I'm going for. But oftentimes we have people, I talk to people who are hiring and I say, hey, why do you have this in the job description? They're like, what? What is that? That doesn't belong in the job description. And another thing, so just be careful. Sometimes, and what I see most often is they say they need all of this experience and you need to know all of these technologies, and then it's for a junior level position. And you're like, what? How does a person have, 5 years experience, 7 years experience, and it's for a junior level position? The honest truth is, if you have 7 years of experience and you're still a junior, you're probably not good at your job, and I wouldn't want to hire you. If I'm hiring a junior, they should only have 1 or less years, 2 or less years experience. So to ask for somebody with more than that, or you get things like ridiculous, like, oh, you must have, 7 years experience in a framework that came out 5 years ago. This happens all the time in tech. Don't be discouraged. Apply for those jobs. Let people know, hey, your requirements are ridiculous. Oftentimes people will put in like the unicorn wish list. Oh, we want somebody that knows this, all of these esoteric languages. And you also need to know React. And really the job is for React. And that's all you need to know. But all those other things are like nice to haves. And so, don't be afraid to apply for a job, even if the requirements seem, even if you think you only meet some of the requirements. But that said, don't apply for a senior level engineering job if you're like fresh out of school or something, right? Keep it reasonable, but read between the lines sometimes on these job descriptions. Number 2, your cover letter should be very short and highly directed. I made the mistake years ago. I made the mistake of drafting this long cover letter, pouring my heart out. Oh, ever since I was a child, blah, 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 blah. I've always dreamed, da, 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 da. And then I would copy and paste it to every job I applied to. And I never got those jobs. I never got the interview, right? And when I became a hiring manager years later, I realized those letters are so painful to read, and it's not what a hiring manager wants. They want a quick note to be like, hey, your company is awesome. I really want to come work there. I meet these requirements and I'm really great for this job because da 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 da. And I can't wait to meet you and get started. That's your cover letter. That's it. It's like 3 lines. And hiring managers love that. That works. That gets you the interview. And it's remarkable. It's almost magic. The longer the cover letter, the less likely you are for somebody to actually read it, and the less likely you are to get that interview. And that is something that I absolutely promise. So try and keep it 3 to 4 lines, super short, super concise. It should be, and back to that, it's directed, meaning whatever job and whatever company you're applying to, that's what you direct and write that cover letter for, which means it's never a copy and paste job. It's short and sweet, but you're rewriting it for everyone. And I should mention, I have this reread the job description as a if you can, because sometimes we're asked to apply for a job where there's not a description. Sometimes you don't have the opportunity to give a cover letter. But if somebody says, hey, send me your resume, the cover letter is the email that the resume is attached to. It's just 3 lines, right? Oh, thanks so much. As discussed, here's my resume. Really love what you guys do there. Can't wait to meet you and discuss this further. So you're always tailoring your cover letter, but also when possible, tailor your resume to the job and to the company. So like I mentioned, I would have multiple versions of my resume, and depending on what job I was applying to, I would send one of those, or I would tweak it and then send it. So don't be, have multiple copies of your resume, and don't be afraid to tweak it, and always write your cover letter for the job you're looking for. Number 4, there's a lot of debate as to whether you should put your address on your resume. And in terms of your actual mailing address, I don't think it's so important. I think putting it on there kind of shows like, hey, I have nothing to hide. But what I think is a lot more important is just putting like your city and state if you're applying for a job that's local, right? So if I'm applying to a job here in South Florida and I live in Boca Raton, Florida, I'm going to make sure to put Boca Raton, Florida in my contact area so they know like, oh, he already lives here. He doesn't need to be relocated, or he's not going to like beg us to work remote. Like he's somebody here. And a lot of companies will prefer to hire local. Even companies that are hiring from all over the world, they often prefer to hire local. So if you're local, put your address on. If you're not, leave it off. And number 5, name drop. Again, this is if it's possible, right? I've worked at some big companies, and I've worked for, done work for some big companies. I had an agency a while ago, and I got to work on a lot of applications for Fortune 500 companies, and I could rattle off names. I'm not going to put those on my resume. But I will put something on my resume that, oh, I was a NASA research fellow, right? Ooh, boom, NASA, that's a name drop. And then when I get the interview rather, the goal of the resume, get the interview. When I get the interview, then I'll talk to them and I'll be like, oh yeah, at my agency, we were doing work for Sprint and then AccuWeather, blah, blah, blah. And then you name drop. Now, of course, we don't all have names to drop. But if you can, if it works into your resume, put a name or two that, that people know, something impressive. But also holding back and saving that for the interview is good too. Again, when possible. Not everybody has the, that capability, but it's good when you can. This is a time to show off, right? Even if you're super humble, when you're trying to get a job, you want to be the proud peacock and strut your feathers, right? You want to show off and really try and present yourself in the best light. Number 6, only include relevant experience. The background image here is from a bowling alley, right? Monica says, name drop Todd and you'll get hired. Yeah, depending on where. So I put this bowling alley image here because when I was in high school, I worked at a bowling alley for 1 week. That didn't make it onto my resume. It's not very relevant, right? Now, if I was applying to work at some big, bowling ball manufacturing company or some, big bowling chain, I might include that because then it's relevant. But, if you're in your 40s and you've had a bunch of jobs, you don't need to put that you were a babysitter when you were 16. Unless you're applying to work for a company that matches babysitters to, you'd be like, oh, hey, I did that, So something like that, only if it's relevant. And the older stuff on our resume should start to fall away as we get newer, more relevant experience in our career. If you're a software engineer, you should have a GitHub portfolio. We have a saying here at Boca Code, it's get those squares, right? In GitHub, if you're not a developer, this probably means nothing to you, but every time we write code and we commit it to GitHub, it gives us a little green square. This right here, what you see on the bottom here is a timeline, and it starts at like January 1st on the left and goes to December 31st on the right. And each line is 1 week with, I think, like Sunday at the bottom and Saturday at the top. And so you can see like on the edges, the weekends, not a lot of commits, except for a couple of weekends here and there. You could see I had commits. The darker the green, the more commits I had. You could tell there were days where I didn't have any commits. This is impressive. If you see like, oh my God, this person, like they're coding all the time, they're constantly committing, it's impressive. Make sure your GitHub portfolio is up to date. Make sure that you're doing these commits. Make sure you're using GitHub, especially if you're new to code. Make sure you're coding as often as you can and you're committing as often as you can, because people will look at that. Make sure the code you're committing is clean. Again, if you're not a coder, everything I'm saying doesn't necessarily fit, but you probably do have some portfolio of your work somewhere, right? Even if you are a software engineer, you might have a portfolio that shows off and highlights some of the projects you've worked on. One of my favorite portfolios, just to is actually, I'll show you right here. It's by one of my former students, Rebecca Bakels, and she actually built this portfolio in one morning. She came into school, she drew this out on a whiteboard and then built it in React. And it doesn't have a back end, so it's pretty simple. But here she has links to her LinkedIn, her resume, and her GitHub. And then she's got projects she worked on, one of which was for Beth, who's interpreting for us right now. But one thing I really like about this, for each of these projects, she has a little screenshot, a name, a short description, and then links to the actual running demo, and then links to the code, the actual code. So you can see here's her React repo and here's her Node repo. And, so she put this together, and it's cute and it's fun and it matches her personality. And, she got a job within 12 days of graduating. So definitely make sure you have like a polished portfolio and you're pushing to GitHub if you can. It's also sometimes fun to just put in like one fun or human fact about you. So when I was applying years ago, I was applying to Delivery Dudes to work as a software engineer for Delivery Dudes. They're actually based out of Delray Beach. And in their job description, they had some like clever, funny things, like among the requirements, they were like, you need to be good at hacky sack or some, just something fun and showing off the personality of the company. So under awards and certifications, I listed that, I came second place in a disc golf tournament, right? And it's like here, for me, it's like NASA, professor, coder, it's like nerdyville. And then it's like, oh, and also like I competitively played disc golf, right? And so it kind of shows that like I have a more fun human side. You don't want to overdo this. You don't want to throw in like, I was in several tournaments. I picked one. You don't want to put in like, oh, I basket weave and I do this and I surf and I, whatever. Just like one thing to show like, hey, I'm a human being too, not just like a software engineer wonk. Again, if you can. And then also, one of the things I've seen is I've interviewed people. Sometimes you look at a resume and you're intrigued and you're interested and you want to bring somebody in for an interview, but there's obvious questions like something in the resume, like maybe there's a long gap in their job history or something like that. And so you're curious, you're like, I had one candidate who looked really good on paper. I was very interested to interview her, but there was like this long period of time where she didn't have anything on her resume. It was a huge gap. And so of course, it came up in the interview and she froze. She didn't know how to answer it. And I was really turned off by that, this to me was such an obvious question that anybody who was interviewing her would have asked. It wasn't personal, it wasn't inappropriate to ask about that. So, have people, when they review your resume, ask them these things. And maybe like you worked for years at like, as a at a diner, and you're like, this doesn't apply to tech, I'm just going to leave that off. So they ask you and you're like, yeah, I was just, I was working at a diner and my mom was sick and I wanted to be near her, and there's no jobs in her town. So I was like working at the diner and I just left it off my resume. Okay, cool. That's boom, answered, right? You have an answer. Maybe the answer is a little more personal and you don't want to go into it. You can say something like, yeah, I was working at the time, I was paying taxes, but, I don't really want to go into it, but, maybe at the next interview, I'll fill in some details. Ooh, now I'm intrigued. Now I want to bring you in for a second interview because now you're teasing me and we're all naturally curious, right? So if you're withholding some personal information, but teasing that maybe I'll tell you at the next interview, now I'm intrigued and I want to bring you in, right? We humans we're more curious than cats, and you can use that to your advantage, right? Like I said, the whole idea of the resume is to get that interview. So if you answer every possible question in your resume and your cover letter, there's no reason to bring you in, right? So leave some mystery. But make sure you're prepared to answer those things. Number 10, if you can, sometimes you don't have the ability to alter a file name or things like that, but in almost all cases you can. When you send someone your resume, it should be your name. So here I have my last name, my first name, the word resume, and then the date. At least, it may be for me, if I'm applying a bunch of places, I would put, May 2021. But make sure you include your name. Don't just be like resume.pdf. I'm going to have 40 files in my inbox, resume.pdf. And when I save them, I don't know. Now I got to go through every one to find yours. Whereas if you're coming in for an interview in 5 minutes and I want to look at your resume, I see, oh, I see your last name. Boom, there it is. There's their resume. I could find it easily. So make it easy on the hiring managers. And make sure it's like a web friendly and web friendly name with underscores or dashes instead of spaces, no weird characters in the name. Just keep it simple. All right. So those are like some tips that hopefully you guys all will follow. And now let's actually look at the sections that are going to go into your resume. So first off, the first section always should be your name and your up-to-date contact information. Always. The second section should either be your professional experience or your education, right? So if you're new to tech and you just graduated from a boot camp or you just graduated from a university with a degree, your education is probably the most relevant. If you've been at this for a few years, you graduated several years ago, and now you've had a job or two, your professional experience should be the most relevant, because most jobs are looking for somebody with experience over education. So put the experience first if you can, if it's relevant. If you're a career changer, then you want to put your education, like, oh, I went to Boca Code. Before that, this is what I was doing, right? But put whichever one is more relevant. Then you can have other sections, like if you have awards or certifications, that's great. So for me, because I come from academia, I have a lot of publications, so I put some of my publications there. If you're not, you could put like some of your skills, or if you speak multiple languages, right? I know like how to say hello in like 5 or 6 languages. That doesn't count, I don't speak any languages really fluently. I'm working on English, but it's not quite good enough to list it under my languages. If you only know one language, it's not really worth listing. But if you are, a polyglot and you speak, Portuguese and Spanish and English and French, put that's impressive, and in many cases very useful, and could set you apart from other candidates. So this is like the block diagram of what a resume should look like. And now, before I get into some actual examples, I want to talk to you about the great debate. So now we're going to start to get into some of the more nitty-gritty details, and there's a huge debate here. So every hiring manager has a slightly different opinion on what the resume should look like in terms of the content. And what I mean by that is really when it comes down to job experience. This is the only area where there's real debate. So, you worked at company X. What did you do there? Do you have a paragraph of what you did? Do you have bullet points? How detailed are those, etc.? So some hiring managers like to see a fair amount of detail of what you did. Some hiring managers don't want to see anything, right? I'm on that side. I'm like way over to this end of the spectrum. And most people's resumes are on this end of the spectrum. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and pull you in my direction, but I don't want you to come all the way this way, because a lot of hiring managers are not like me. So I'm going to tell you my opinion, but I'm also going to try and steer you towards the middle. So let me show you the extremes first to show you what I'm talking about. So for recruiters and for bots, like, so if you're uploading your resume to like Indeed.com, it's being read by a robot to try and figure, not a literal robot, but a bot, a web bot, to try and figure out what jobs they should, what recruiters they should send your resume to, and based on keywords and search terms. So they're going to look through your resume and try and pull out keywords. I don't want to do that when I read your resume. I don't want to look through giant blocks of text and try and look for keywords like Docker and SQL and whatever. I just want the keywords. Don't make me like read giant blocks of text. So that's one end of the spectrum. And recruiters love these long wordy resumes because there's lots of words and they can look for those words because they don't actually know the technology, but they're told, hey, I need somebody who knows this, 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 and this. So they're like, oh, there's the word, and there's the word, and there's the word. The more words you have, the better. But if you're actually sending a resume to a hiring manager, if they're like me, they want it concise, they want it short, they want to just be able to go, bup, 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 they did this, 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 this. What positions have you held? And now, I'm not the only hiring manager in the world, so I know not everybody's all the way on my end of the spectrum. So can we please both? Can you please the bots? Can you please the recruiters? And can you please the Todd Alberts of the world and put your resume somewhere in the middle? And that's where I want to steer you. I don't want to steer you towards my end. I want to steer you right towards the middle. But most of you are here and you need to get off of that edge. You need to come to the middle. Because these wordy resumes don't get read. So this is what a friend of mine sent me his resume, and he's now working at City Furniture as a data engineer, which was kind of his dream job, and we're really excited for him. But this was his resume that he sent to them. And to me, I look at this and I love how clean it is, right? I can quickly look down and see, okay, PGA, ModMed, and IronHack, those are the last 3 places he worked. I can see the positions he held: data engineer intern, lead teaching assistant. Hopefully you guys can see my mouse cursor because I'm pointing with that. And I could also see the dates very clearly, right? When did he work at each one of these companies? So it's super easy for me to read. But then he has all these blocks of text here. And this I do not like. But what I do, my eye goes to Oracle here and to SQL, right? And SQL, and if I'm lucky, I see the word Python and maybe pandas and maybe Redshift, but I'm not reading all this, right? But I will look for, like, I will scan it and look for keywords, S3, Python, right? So don't make me scan it. First of all, if you feel super strongly about having this, bold the keywords for me. So make Oracle and SQL and Python bold and red, so I can see the key skills that you have, right? But what I call these sections are, I call these even your mom won't read these. So you send your resume, mom, look, what do you think of my resume? She's like, wow, sweetie, that looks great. She didn't read those bullet points, right? I'm not going to read those bullet points. I don't know you. So here's what I want, which again, I'm steering you away from that edge that I just showed you. I'm also steering you away from this. I want you at somewhere in the middle. This is what I want, because I come from an academic background, and in academia, we have something called a CV, right? Which a CV or curriculum vitae is, there is no fluff. There is no detail. It's just what position you had, where you had it, and what date. And oh, I love it. This is what I love, right? So this makes my heart sing, right? As opposed to the wordy, like, big blocks of text. But again, this is also the other end of the spectrum. And a lot of hiring managers, even ones that I work with and that, do hiring with me, they don't like this. They want to see a little more detail. So So can we please both? And this to me is the right answer, right? Is to take those keywords, Python, data analytics, machine learning, SQL, Oracle, Redshift, that we saw in the big block of text, and highlight them right here underneath that one line job. So I've got the dates, the company, and the position. So I can look down very easily and see PGA, Modmed, Iron Hack. I can look at the dates. I can easily see the positions here: data engineer intern, lead teaching assistant. And then if I want the details, I can see, oh, Python, cool, right? AWS, JavaScript, great. All right. This to me is perfect. And Mark is asking if there's a limit to the number of blue keywords. And I would say, yeah, you don't try and just fill your resume with, every keyword you could think of. But if you did a lot, like here, he did a lot, he was playing with a lot of different technologies at PGA, listed all out. There's another thing you can do is you can have a skills section where you list them all. But I really like this format. And I think as long as it's readable, Mark, I think you can add more and more. But I really don't think for most jobs, and it really depends on your level too, right? For most jobs, like I have students that they want to put that they know visual code. Visual code is a code editor. Nobody cares that you know visual code. Or they want to put Photoshop, and it's like, who cares that you know Photoshop? I want you to be able to write code, not edit a picture of me. So keep it relevant. And maybe, Mark, what you do is you put maybe you have 40 keywords there, but when you go to send it to each company, you get rid of the ones that aren't relevant for that position, right? So maybe I have a whole bunch, but I only highlight the ones that I want that hiring manager to see for that job at that company. So here's an example of mine. This is my resume from a couple of years ago, or from, I guess, last year. And again, this is really a CV. So I don't have any of those blue, bullet points, because I want it to be one page and it's very deep, right? I have a lot of education because I've got multiple degrees. I have a lot of professional experience, and really this is just select because I've been working. I got my first job in 1986. So I'm leaving off almost 20 years of job experience because it's the last 20 years that are much more relevant, right? So, or the last 17 years are a lot more relevant than the, 20 years before that. So, again, keep it relevant, right? And then for me, my professional experience is much more important than my education. I also have grants and awards. I don't have the disc golf tournament on here because this was actually going to the state, and I didn't want the state to think of me as a human. They don't tend to look highly on cute things when you send things to government. And then I have publications here, but I like this because, a lot of people really like that I have selected here because I don't have every one of my publications here. It's just the ones that I chose. And that you can do, sometimes you're like, oh, I have all of these things I want to put on my resume. You can put selected and just choose the top ones. And also, like, if you have a gap in your professional experience, or maybe I want to leave off that, I worked at, these universities, but for some reason, but I want to put, these here, and I'm leaving off several years. I can just put selected professional experience if I want. And then if somebody interviews me and asks me about it, I can say, oh yeah, well, I had jobs during that time. I just left them off because they weren't relevant. Also, right here, I have my Boca code address. If I was applying for another job, I wouldn't put my Boca code address. I would put my Gmail address. But since this was going to the state to tell them, like, hey, I'm okay, that it was for our application to become a school, I wanted to use my professional one for that. So just to review, I've got my updated contact information at the top, relevant experience next, which, you know, comes before education for me. But if you just are a recent graduate, you should flip those. Then I have awards, which are, you know, is optional, and publications obviously is optional. Not everybody's going to have that. But I recommend you all to start putting out publications. You don't have to be published in a peer-reviewed journal. Write a Medium article, right? You, as in tech, we're solving problems all the time. Write about it, post about it in Medium, and then, you know, put those links here. Show that, like, yeah, I have all these Medium articles that I wrote. It shows good communication. It really helps get your name out there, helps make a name for yourself in the community. So what's missing from this? There's no fluff. There's no wordy descriptions that no one reads, right? Although I do recommend putting the bullets under this. I don't recommend for most people, unless you have, you know, if you're a senior developer, you can get away with this. If you have years and years of experience, you can get away with this. I was lead developer here, lead developer here, lead developer here. People look at that, they're like, okay, this guy's good. And, you know, and you don't need what technologies you used. But if you're more junior, mid-level, you can, you know, bullet points with the technologies that you used. Also consider adding what languages that you speak. And you can also have bullet point of skills, but I would really focus in on like the most desirable skills like React, AWS, Node, Express, you know, whatever, you know, those are the things that are being looked for. Agile, not programs you use like VS Code or, you know, things like that, but the actual skills, the languages and the technologies that you use. So that's all I have for the presentation. So, you know, feel free to reach out to me in the future, but I'm going to stop it there and give a little bit of time. If you guys have any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Thanks, Todd.
A question?
Mark.
Yeah, Mark's got his hand up.
Okay, so what about adding soft skills on your resume or like or CV or something like that?
On a CV for academia, absolutely not. But a resume for tech, soft skills are really important. So if you've ever taught, that shows that you're really good at communicating. So I would definitely include that there, even if it was a volunteer position. You know, you could say something like, you know, excellent, you know, verbal and written communication skills, or, you know, however you want to say that. But a lot of times that sounds like fluff, like anyone can say that. And you have to be careful, because if you say like excellent written communication skills, and then there's like, you're not good at communicating over email, they're going to be like, what the heck, you know, or you're not, you know, quick to respond or something. So if you say it, make sure it's true. But things like agile, right? Agile methodology, which is a project management, is highly sought after. And, you know, it's more of a softer skill, but definitely is a skill you can list on your resume. So I think it depends on the specific soft skill. If you have a way of making it sound professional and not sound fluffy, that's my opinion.
Todd, if I could add
Please.
something to that, because I agree with your statement that, you know, you got to find that middle road where you're not so wordy, but you're also concise. With soft skills, providing, you know, an example in a concise way, like it should be one line, no more. Like if it rolls over to the second line, but it's only one word, maybe that's okay. But it's very briefly, you know, led a team of 3 other professionals in completing a project on time. That would be an example of how you use soft skills in completion of your job. And that would be something that, you know, me as a hiring manager, I would like to see that, versus you just saying that, you know, you have good soft skills. Like if you were able to do that, that tells me you have good soft skills.
Yeah, and you know, completely agree. You could even break that into like 2 bullet points, like, you know, led team, you know, complete project on time, right? Like that could almost be broken into 2, right? So yeah, those kinds of things, I think if you do it in like Elizabeth said, in a not fluffy, not wordy, but concise way, that and having those examples where it's not just talk, it's not just rhetoric, is really good. And I think especially if you're struggling to, so one other thing I want to address too, I talk to people all the time who are looking for jobs, and there are a lot of jobs in tech. So if you're struggling to get a job in tech, there's probably a reason. And what I always ask is, the first question I ask is, are you getting interviews? Right? Because if you're not getting interviews, then there's probably a problem with your resume or your cover letter. And so that's easy. We could fix those things. Those are addressable. If you're getting interviews and you've had interview after interview and you're not getting a job, then there's a problem with how you're interviewing. And then we need to address that. So look at where your stop is, right? If you're not getting interviews, then let's look at your resume and let's look at how you're writing your cover letter and where you're applying, right? That's the other thing too, is, how many jobs have you applied for? And if you change and tweak your resume and you change your cover letter, don't be afraid to, 6 months later, apply for the same job again. If it's still open, maybe they would reconsider you, especially if your resume and your cover letter look different.
Okay, thank you. So I do have one more question. So
Of course.
I am struggling with, I have so many different experiences and internships and in the industry, I'm sorry, and just life experience. So many of my experience include travel skills. So that would mean if there was a job that wasn't relevant to the job that I applied for, but I do have skills that I can transfer over, how exactly would I include it in the skills without including my prior relevance job? You know what I mean? Am I clear?
Yeah. I think that a lot of our past job experience is relevant in tech. The hardest developers I've ever worked for, the worst developers I've ever worked with, let me rephrase that. The worst developers I ever worked with didn't have worldly experience like you do, Mark. They hadn't experienced other cultures like you have. They didn't have experience outside of, coding, and they were very narrow focused. And so when we're coding, we're always coding for something that's real world and relevant. And whether we're building a real estate app or we're building something for, an experience for a company, if somebody hasn't had those experiences or hasn't ever thought about that, or doesn't even understand like how real estate's different in another place, they're not as good at doing that job. So I think, you list all of your jobs and you try and put something there that makes it relevant. So, like for example, if I hired you, Mark, to build an app, right? We're building like a mobile app, let's say. That app is going to need to market it. We're going to need, and maybe you've had a job in the past that wasn't even in tech, but it had something to do with marketing, right? So now I know, like, okay, you're going to understand the marketing, even though that's not the job you're hired for, you have an understanding of that. So when we pass this, when we're talking to the marketing team, you're going to bring that experience with us in that conversation. So having these jobs, these other jobs that like maybe aren't related to tech, they help you relate to and communicate with people in other facets of the company, other clients, things like that. So the fact that you've traveled so extensively, that makes you a huge asset to a company, because now I know I would assume you're gonna be much more culturally sensitive than somebody who's never left their hometown, which I've met people who've never left their hometown and they don't understand the world around us, right? The way someone like you who's lived all over the world, right? Not just traveled, but lived in many different cultures. And I would absolutely highlight that in your resume and brag about it. Make it, like, don't hide that. That's big. It's important. And it shows you can work and get along with different people and that you know how to communicate with different people. And I think that's important.
Okay, thank you.
And just one last thing is, if you want me, I think I've looked at your resume in the past, but if you want me to take a look at it again, just shoot it my way, Mark. You know how to find me. So shoot
I
me a
will.
resume and I'm happy to give it a once over and maybe even, share it with, Jonathan and Michelle, the other two senior engineers here, and see what they think.
Awesome.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Todd. You're great.
Thank you.
Okay, so it looks like we're right at time, and I just want to let everybody know that we will be recording this. So if you guys want to watch it again, or maybe share it with someone who is looking for a job, who needs some feedback, and you always have Todd or I for guidance here or support. But thanks again, Todd, for being here today. You're awesome, and everyone else for attending. We're super excited about this event. Especially since we're helping our community get hired, and just share some tips. So I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your day. We actually have one more workshop today, and I believe that is at 3 p.m. So if you guys have any other questions, feel free to join us at 3 p.m. or just wait for the recording of this video. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Or I'll see you guys at 3. Thank you.
Thank you all.